Welcome to On the X. My guest today is Steven Kotler, a New York Times bestselling author, journalist, and entrepreneur who has spent decades exploring the limits of human performance. He's the founder and executive director of the Flow Research Collective, where he leads research into peak performance, flow states, and the neuroscience of human potential. Steven's work has influenced elite athletes, special operations personnel, and high performers across industries, helping them overcome mental barriers and work at their highest level. His books include The Rise of Superman, Stealing Fire, and The Art of Impossible, blending science, storytelling, and practical tools to unlock human potential. So here we go with Steven Kotler on the X. There's a story in here that I want to start with, which it's funny, it's about 3/4 of the way through the book, and I thought, oh my God, this is such a hook story, which is the story of you and Lyme disease and how you kind of got into this. And I'm a kindred spirit in this because I'm somebody who suffered from a very debilitating chronic illness for 10 years or so. Mine was triggered by a mold exposure. But I had certain doctors say, oh, you have Lyme disease. And I, went through this basically, and everything you talk about personally, I completely empathize with because I've felt all of that too. Being bedbound, cognitive dysfunction to the point where you just can't focus on anything. You can't remember anything. But you sort of discovered through this journey how much of that was sort of a mental loop, so to speak. Like there was things going on in your brain that weren't necessarily pathogen related, that you, through activity, you could overcome some of this. So can you just talk about that experience a little bit? And because is that what got you, is that the primer that actually got you into flow?
So there's two primers, and there's like, when people ask me this question, I'm always like, you got 20 minutes? Do you want me to just give you a big long, so I'll start with the Lyme story, and then I'll weave the other one in the back end so you understand how they fit together. I'll do it as quickly as I possibly can for you. So as you pointed out, I want to say 30, maybe 29, right there. And I got Lyme disease, and I was one of the very first cases in California. Nobody knew what the hell was wrong with me. If you read my book, West to Jesus, there's literally a list that's like 130 diseases long of all the things the doctors thought I had before they found out. I'm sure you had the exact same experience, right? That fun house, that's crazy. It makes you nuts. Anyways, it was bad. And it started out bad and got worse. I lost all my cognitive function. I could literally think and forgive my brain maybe 20 minutes a day. I was so physically debilitated by the end of it, I couldn't get out of bed and walk across a room. At one point, I had surgeons who wanted to operate on 5 different joints in my body because they were all failing at once in really catastrophic ways. And I remember asking them, I was like, isn't it unusual for 5 joints? I'm perfectly healthy. I'm active. I'm fit. I was in the best shape of my life before this happened. All my joints, and they're like, we're not our department. Anyways, by the end of it, I was not getting any better, and I was bankrupt. I lost the woman I was going to marry. I lost all the stuff, right? The job I had spent a decade trying to got the job, lost the girl, lost the house, and nearly bankrupted myself trying to find cures. And nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And even once they figured out that I had Lyme disease, the medicine I wasn't getting any better. Nothing was happening. I had been on doxycycline, which I'm sure you had that experience for like a year. And my stomach lining started bleeding out. And they were like, well, there's nothing else we can do for you. And we don't think you're ever going to get better. We don't know. And I was like, okay, I'm going to kill myself because I'm a burden. Like, I'm a burden to my friends, I'm a burden to my family. I can't take care of myself. Like, I'm out of options. And I had sleeping pills, and I had the booze, I had all this stuff. And in the middle of it was like a 2-week window where I'd sort of made up my mind. A friend of mine showed up at my doorstep, good friend, and she was like, we're going surfing. And I just started laughing at her. I was like, Andrea, I can't walk across a fucking room. I can't go surf. You're out of your mind. I can't move. And she would not leave my house. She had made up her mind that we were going surfing. This is what I thank God for her. But after 3 hours of bad drink, and I was just finally, I was like, what is the worst can happen? You know what I mean? I die. Okay, fine. You know what I
Right.
mean? Cool. Let's go surfing. Just literally just to get this woman to just like leave me alone at this point. And they had to almost carry me to the car. When we got to the break, we drove to Sunset Beach in Los Angeles. If you know anything about surfing, Sunset Beach is like the wimpiest beginner break in the entire universe. And it was summer and it was a really warm day and the waves were really small and there was no one out, which was a miracle. And they had to literally like sort of wade me out to the lineup. You know, they gave me a giant board the size of a Cadillac. So bigger the
Right.
board, the easier it is to surf. You probably know that. And I'm out in the lineup and it's amazing. I can even like sort of sit on the board at this point. And, but it felt great sort of to be outside because I hadn't been outside for a really long time, I guess. And a wave came like 30 seconds later. I saw the wave pop up and I still to this day don't really know what happened. Like muscle memory, which isn't really a thing, but we'll call it a thing, took over. And I just spun the board around and popped to my feet. And I popped up into at what I now know of as a macro flow state. But at the time, I didn't have that term. And I popped up into what felt like another dimension. Suddenly, like one, I felt great. My head was clear. The pain was completely gone from my body. I could use my body. And I could actually, I was never a great surfer to begin with. I was an intermediate surfer at best. But it sort of came back to me and I rode that wave and it felt great. And I caught like 3 or 4 more that day and kept having these weird, I felt like I was having out of body experiences. I could see out of the back of my head. It was very mystical and very weird. And I didn't know what the hell was happening to me, but I felt great. And I felt so good. I caught 5 more waves. And after the 5th wave, I was I was disassembled. Like there was no Steven left. They drove me home. They put me into bed. People brought me food for the next, I think it was 14 days. I couldn't even get to my kitchen like 50 feet away. And on the 14th day, which was the day I could walk again, I got out of bed and I had a neighbor who was a pro surfer and from back east. And I didn't even know him very well, but I walked down the hall and I banged on his door and I introduced myself and I was like, can you take me to the ocean? I can't drive a car right now, but I have to go. So, and he did. And I went back and I did it again. Same kind of weird altered state experience, felt amazing. And again, same like another 2 weeks in bed. Then I went back and did it again. And over the course of like 8 months, when the only thing I was doing differently in my life was surfing and having these really profound altered state experiences, I went from 10% functional, less than maybe, to about 85% functional. And this raised a number of questions. The first question was, what the heck is going on? Because surfing is not a known cure for chronic autoimmune conditions. So, like, what is the science here? And the second thing is, Lyme is only fatal if it gets into your brain. I don't, I'm a science guy. I don't have quasi mystical experiences, and I certainly don't have them while surfing. That was like insanely flaky to me. And so I was worried that these experiences were proof the disease had gotten into my brain. I was actually losing my mind. It was eating my brain and I was dying anyways.
Hmm.
And this was like a temporary reprieve. So I set out to figure out what the heck had gone on with me. Very long story short, but what I ended up discovering is the experiences that I had been having, I already actually sort of knew about. They were flow state experiences. And flow is technically defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. That doesn't help anybody very much. It's one of those definitions, but it really refers to any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption when you get so focused on what you're doing that everything else just
Right.
melts away. Your sense of self-consciousness gets really quiet, right? Time will pass strangely. It'll slow down. You can do that freeze for, in fact, if you've been in a car crash, it happens in battle too. Or it'll speed up, which is the normal experience. And you get so sucked into what you're doing that 5 hours go by in 5 minutes. And throughout all aspects of performance, mental, physical, and emotional, we can talk more about what that means, go through the roof. And it turns out, even though I work on flow for peak performance, but it turns out we now know the following things. One, we know that um, one of the things that happens as we move into flow is there's a global release of nitrous oxide. It's a gaseous signaling molecule. It's everywhere in your body. If you go to the gym, when your lungs open up and you sort of like 20 minutes into your workout, your lungs open up, it gets quiet upstairs. That's nitrous oxide that's doing that. That's what's happening. And what it does is it flushes stress hormones completely out of your system. And as you move into flow, you get these feel-good performance-enhancing neurochemicals like dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, and anandamide endorphins. Two things are important here. The first is with an autoimmune condition. That's a nervous system that's gone haywire. And one of the reasons people stay sick with autoimmune conditions for a very long time is humans are homeostatic organisms, as you know. And but if you've had an autoimmune condition, motor exposure, I bet was the same way, where you wake up in the morning and you're like, am I sick today? Am I not sick today? I can't tell. You go into the day feeling okay, and halfway through you're like, oh my God, I'm really sick, and you have to cancel all your plans and get home. Like, that's the experience of a chronic illness. Or was that yours?
Yeah, I mean, look, I could spend hours just on that rabbit hole of like chronic illness and stuff like that. But yes, my experiences and everything, that when I read that story, I'm like, oh, okay, this is just another example of where people there's some kind of trigger, in your case, Lyme disease. And more than likely your body at some point actually fought off the pathogen, but it stayed in this oversympathetic state, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. So by resetting my nervous system back to zero, and then all these other neurochemicals significantly amplify immune function. So much so that Herbert Benson, who's a cardiologist at Harvard, who mapped what is now known as the flow cycle. Flow doesn't work like a binary. You're not in the zone or out of your zone. There's a 4-stage cycle, and there's very precise neurochemistry under each phase of the cycle. Herb Benson mapped it. And he's predominantly a cardiologist and works on health and mindfulness and things like that. And he said in his book, The Breakout Principle, and I think this is overstating, but he's not wrong, that he believes flow is the engine behind all cases of so-called spontaneous healing. And it was for this reason, for the very thing I'm talking about. There has been, that was 30 years ago, there's been a tremendous amount of neural immunology that have been done since that shows how well flow heals the immune system. But even more exciting is, how I was mentally debilitated. And so we also know that flow is neuroprotective against depression, anxiety. My lab proved that flow will overwrite PTSD. So a lot of the work we're currently doing with the military is because you can use flow to overwrite PTSD. But it's all the same sort of mechanism. Yep. So that was the discovery, and the like quasi mystical stuff. That's really where my career started. Like trying to figure out, am I crazy? Why am I feeling like I'm one with the ocean when I'm surfing with the ocean? How did I have this out of body experience? And it turns out there's biology underneath all of that, and we now understand it. We know why flow produces it, but we did not at the time. And I set out to try to decode this. The other half of the story is that I had spent my 20s chasing action sport athletes around the world, and I had already known that these athletes were using flow as a performance tool. They would find the ways to drop into flow and use the state. So I had seen that flow will take you from zero up to superhero in action sport athletes. I had no idea it could take you from seriously subpar back to normal as well, which was what I discovered. So I've seen, and the action sport story is just sort of, it's as long and as complicated as the story I just told you, but you have to go back to the 90s. We didn't have a word for flow. We had flow, but we didn't understand the neurobiology, consciousness study, altered states, meditation. None of these things were studied, right? We had to invent the field. My mentor had to invent the field of neurotheology, which is the use of using neuroscience to study sort of so-called spiritual experiences. Yep. And we're now actually finishing, it'll be out in 2 months, the textbook, the very first textbook anybody who's written on applied performance neuroscience, which is sort of like, in a weird way, it actually emerged out of neurotheology because there was no other place to put it. Like flow just didn't fit in the categories. A lot of people thought it was a mystical experience. So like neurotheology was fine. And so a lot of this, it sounds really clean and neat now, but it wasn't at the time. It was a mess. And a lot of this stuff was really taboo in science. And all right, I've been talking.
No, it's awesome. I was just going to say, I know you do tons of podcasts and interviews, and you've been talking about this, but to see your zeal and continued excitement about this subject is great. I mean, it means that it means a lot to you, and that it's very interesting to you still.
Well, I've got the best job in the world. Are you kidding? This is the
Yeah.
best job ever.
So I just love that story, man. It just resonates so strongly with me. And when it came up in the book, I was just like, oh man, that is just such a great origin story.
It was such a profound, it's such a profound experience to be that ill and suddenly like
Yes.
bent,
Yes.
right? Like it's a
It's
wild
wild, and
experience.
it just for me highlights once again how important your mind can be in your day-to-day experience. I mean, that seems obvious, but the fact that your mind can have that much of a control over your physiological state when it's that low to bring it back up based on what you do and the behavior you engage in is just so profound, I think. And so it's such an important lesson. So I think flow is one of these things where we're sort of talking around it a little bit. And I think for most people, they they may not understand kind of the neuroscience and all the specifics that you understand at this point, but they kind of get it. They're like, okay, I know what you're talking about. But for the folks that are not extreme sport athletes, they're not suffering from Lyme disease, they're not Navy SEALs. What can that look like for them, and why is it important?
Oh yeah.
Right?
So it's a good question. So flow is optimal performance. It's how evolution shaped humans to perform at their very best. And it doesn't matter what your domain you're in, right? I started my work in action sport athletes. And then I took this question of what does it take to like do the impossible? How do you use peak performance and flow to like level up your game like that before? And I did work in every domain imaginable. Um, Business, science, technology, yeah, on and on and on. Wherever you see peak human performance, you see flow. The reason people get confused is the detail that most people don't understand is that flow is not a singular experience, it's a spectrum of experiences. On the low end, you have microflow. Let me back up one step. If you're a psychologist, I work on the neurobiology of flow, and how we define flow is very technical and it fills up a page, right? But how a psychologist defines flows, it's a state that has 6 core characteristics: complete concentration on the task at hand, the merger of action and awareness, the vanishing or diminishment of our sense of self, time distortion, speeding up or slowing down. We don't experience on the inside peak performance, we experience a sense of control. And this could be, this could be an athlete, a basketball player, and suddenly the basket looks as big as a hula hoop and they can't miss. This could be me as a writer. It's Tuesday morning at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and I just started my writing day. And suddenly, like, I've snapped into the zone and the sentences are dancing all over the place. And I can do things with words I can't normally do it, like Tuesday at 4 a.m. This could be a businessman or woman leading a great meeting where suddenly the ideas are bouncing off the walls, everyone's on the same page and totally dialed in. Or it could be a SEAL team moving through the kill house and everybody knows exactly what the other person is going to do 2 seconds before they do it. It's the same mechanism. Where people screw it up is you can be a microflow. All those conditions show up, but they're dialed to like 1 or 2. So this is everybody. This is you go to work, you sit down and write a quickie email to your boss. You're sucked into what you're doing. You look up, an hour's gone by, you've written an essay, and maybe your sense of self or self-consciousness didn't totally disappear, but bodily awareness didn't. The first thing that happens when you pop back into consciousness is you're like, oh my God, I gotta go to the bathroom. That's all of us all day long. That's microflow. Most common microflow experience on earth is reading a book. The second most common is 2 middle managers at work getting so lost in a conversation that an hour goes by and it feels like 5 minutes. Those are literally like, that's microflow. That's all the time. It happens to, there's a study done back in the 80s that said that people report spending at least 5% of their work life in microflow, often without even knowing it. The other end of the spectrum, macroflow. That was my experience. That's the full-blown, all 6 characteristics show up, but they're turned up to 11. And here, instead of like our sense of self, normally when you say self-consciousness disappears, that is the voice in your head, your inner critic, just shuts up a little bit, right? Gets quiet. But you get, at the extreme end, you don't just get very, very quiet. Yourself starts to disappear. You start to merge. You tend to merge with whatever you're focused on. Surfers will talk about becoming one with the wave. SEALs will talk about becoming a single unit, right? They're a hive. They're a hive mind. There's no longer a separate team of individuals. They're right? There's that, but you become one with painters, become one with the painting, that sort of stuff. It's a merger between action and awareness. It's what happens, but at the extreme level, our sense of self disappears and we sort of start sharing consciousness. There's a whole, I could talk for 25 minutes about what the
Sure.
biology is and how that works. And if you want, I'm happy to, but that's the opposite end. And in fact, one last story about this, because it's kind of fun. We didn't know flow states weren't spiritual experiences until the 50s. So the work on flow scientifically starts back in the 1870s. And in the 1950s, Abraham Maslow, the great humanist psychologist, is doing a study on success. And he has put together a study group of some of those fantastic people in the world, Eleanor Roosevelt and Albert Einstein and blah, blah, blah. And he's studying them. What do they have in common? What's the secret to your success? And it's Maslow, so he's a humanist psychologist. So he means, he doesn't just mean, do you make a lot of money? He means, do you make a lot of money? Are you at the top of your field? But are you wise? Are you kind? Are you a good person? Those kinds of questions mattered as well. And he found that they had nothing in common, except they had all found ways to alter their consciousness, get into states of flow, and use flow to amplify their performance. But everybody in the study group was an atheist. Accidentally. Just happened. Just so happened. And so Maslow was like, oh my God, these are not spiritual experiences. These people are not religious. They're not spiritual. They're not inside meditative tradition. Nothing. They're atheists. And so what is this? And he was the first renaming of flow, but he called them peak experiences. Before, William James talked about them in varieties of mystical experience as a mystical experience. That's where they were classified. It changed, and then Csikszentmihalyi came along 10 years later, and he asked the same question you asked, sort of, which is Maslow was like, what the best of the best? Csikszentmihalyi was like, nah, what about everybody else? What about this, grape farmers and sheep herders and, guys who work on assembly lines and whatever? And so that was his question. He went around the world talking to millions and tens of thousands of people, actually, about times in their life when they felt their best and performed their best. And everybody had the same answer. And and this answer was, by the way, I don't know, but I'm in this altered state where every decision, every action flows seamlessly, perfectly, effortlessly from the last. And that's where the term comes from. So many people used it to describe the experience. The Csikszentmihalyi was like, we should call this flow states, because that's literally the term that everybody the world over uses to describe the experience. And that's where the term
on the
comes from.
neurochemistry stuff, that's very interesting. And I know we could get into that. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to say, hey, people that are interested, go read your books, right? Those details are in there. And I think for a lot of people too, it's kind of like, okay, that's interesting, but how does it benefit me, right? What they really want to know is like, okay, why do I care, right? So is it?
Let's get out to the why you care portion of the program. What's it good for, right? So I said flow amplifies cognitive, mental, physical, and emotional performance. So on the physical side, I'm not going to spend much time here, but if you care, like athletes and Navy SEALs actually care about this stuff, strength goes up, stamina goes up, fast twitch muscle response increases, pain sensitivity decreases. All those things happen in flow. So on the physical side, it's a big deal. On the cognitive side, we see a bunch of different spikes. So productivity is the one that everybody likes to look at. McKinsey did this very famous study. They spent 10 years talking to top executives. How much more productive are you in flow than out of flow? The average was 500% more productive. That's a step function's worth of change to productivity. It was such a laughable number that when it first came up, nobody believed it. And then we started seeing all these other numbers in other attributes in line with it. So, for example, the DARPA, the U.S. Defense Department, and teamed up with a woman named Chris Burka and a team, and they found by dropping soldiers in flow, they could learn. I think they were in the first study was target acquisition skills, 230% faster than normal. So that's a huge step function in how. Then they redid the experiment and they took people who had never fired a weapon before, I believe, and they took them from like zero, they dropped them into flow and trained them from zero to expert, and they got them there in about 50% less time. And I think they used archers, handgun shooters, and riflemen, I want to say. So that's big impact on learning. creativity, it's really difficult to measure. We've done it in my lab. A bunch of other labs have found it. You can see numbers that are somewhere like between 400 and 800% above baseline, but I don't, that's a, I don't want to quote that. The best thing I can say is what Teresa Amabile at Harvard found is that heightened creativity that flow produces will outlast the flow state by a day, maybe two. Motivation goes through the roof, learning. So, and I also mentioned on the emotional side, I said this at the beginning, flow overwrites PTSD, it's actually neuroprotective against depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia and cardiac related stress conditions. And we've known the following since the 60s. Flow underpins happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction, meaning and purpose. So much so that Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, who runs the positive psychology school, they've changed how we define happiness, and there are 3 tiers. The upper 2 tiers have flow baked into the definition. So when I say flow is how humans perform at their best, it is literally how we perform at their best. What this really means, and I always say this, I say this at the end of my speeches, but I think it's really important that you hear it. You got to ask yourself, what aren't you doing in your life that you could be doing if you were 500%
Yeah.
more productive, or 200, you would learn 230% faster than normal, or you were 400% more creative than normal. This is built in to all of us. It comes hardwired, it's built in, free, right? If you sort of learn how to harness flow correctly. So the reason to do it is it sounds ridiculous because I've just listed everything you could possibly want, but flow is optimal performance. It's how human beings perform at their very best. So it optimizes everything. And I have to list a whole bunch of superlatives, and it sounds like I'm lying, which is why I like the neuroscience, because I could, explain why all this happens in a lot of fancy language. But really, it's such a significant change that it was, even along the way, it's been hard for the researchers also to be like, really? Is this actually possible? Because like in self-help, if you get like a 5% boost of
Yeah.
happiness that lasts for 3 months, that's freaking huge. That's like $1 million company,
Yeah.
right? And so it's the claims, you need outrageous amounts of data to support outrageous claims, which is great because we now have 30 years of neuroscience backing all this up. And, it's a giant global field, and it's not just me or my lab. There's tens of thousands of researchers working on this.
I want to pause for a moment and acknowledge a brand that's doing something you don't see very often anymore. Ghostbed didn't just sponsor an episode. They stepped up to support the entire IRONCLAD network, and that matters. Ghostbed is built by people who care deeply about quality. It's a product-first company led by Mark Warner, who still shows up every day obsessed with doing things the right way. Their mattresses are all made in America, engineered with advanced cooling technology, breathable materials, and 0 shortcuts. They have 3 different collections to choose from, and they've built an online sleep quiz, so you can dial in exactly what works for your body. And behind it all is a real in-house team of sleep experts, never outsourced. Right now, we have an exclusive offer for our listeners that beats any other discount out there. Go to ghostbed.com/onthex and use code ONTHEX for an extra 15% off site-wide. When you support them, you're not just buying a mattress. You're supporting the kind of companies that keep independent, high-stakes storytelling alive.
So you said drop into flows. How do we do that? If I'm sitting here, I get done talking to you and I want to go work on something for 2 hours, and I want to ideally drop into flow because I want to make the best use of my time.
I got
you.
you,
How do
bro.
I do it? What do I do?
All right. So we go high level, and we'll get to tactical in a second. High level, flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. First thing you need to know is flow follows focus. The state only shows up when all our attention is on the right here, the right now. So there are 28 known flow triggers. They come in 2 varieties. There's individual triggers, what'll drive me into flow or what'll drive you into flow. And then there's group flow triggers, what will drive both of us together into flow. And group flow comes at every level of scale. Interpersonal flow is me and you talking. Group flow is like a team, a fourth quarter comeback or a SEAL team. And then there's flow at scale, which is known as communitas. So you go to a rock concert and you merge with music and everybody's clapping and syncing, one with the band and all that stuff. That's communitas. That's group flow at scale. But of these 28 triggers, 12 are individual flow, 16 are group flow. There's probably way more, but that's what we've discovered so far. They all do the same thing. They do it in a bunch of different ways, but if we're staying out of the deep weeds, the neurobiology, they all drive your attention to the present moment. They massively amplify attention. So the first trigger, and I'll just, you want to get into flow in your work you're going to. So the first thing I would say is, well, the most obvious trigger is the one, complete concentration is a flow trigger. Big surprise, right? But that actually means very specific things from a neurobiological standpoint. And let me back up one sec and tell you why the neurobiology matters so much. Neurobiology is mechanism. When you try to train from psychology is very individual. So what works for me psychologically will not work for you. That's almost the only guarantee there is in peak performance. What works for me won't work for you because your psychology, your personality has been shaped by your genetics and your early childhood experience, and it's very individual. It's very customized. You have to go one level down to neurobiology. Neurobiology is shared mechanism shaped by evolution, the same in all humans. And I have to define one more term for you, which is peak performance. What the fuck do I mean by peak performance? Very simple. Nothing more or less than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. That's what I mean by peak performance. Flow sits at the heart of that biology. There are 28 triggers that drive us into flow. The first is complete concentration. But we mean very specific things by complete concentration. So first, when I train people in complete concentration, the first thing I say is, look, you're not going to be more powerful than your devices. Practice distraction management, right? You're not going to win the war of attention over your cell phone. They built that thing to resemble a slot machine, the most addictive and distracting technology. I mean, that's what it was designed to be, right? That's how they built our phones. And you're not going to win. You literally aren't. So you have to manicure the space, turn off email, turn off instant messages, turn off everything. I like to write at 4:00 in the morning. Nothing's on. My lights stay off. And by the way, if you're interested in amplified creativity, keep your lights off. If you're interested in amplified logical thinking, linear thinking, you want to do your taxes, turn your lights on. Darkness amplifies divergent thinking. Light amplifies convergent thinking. Logical and linear, light, darkness. The same thing, by the way, people don't know this. If you're angry or scared, you're super logical. So that's also a great time to do your taxes or like edit a book. If you're joyful or happy, divergent thinking. So that's the good time to write the book, right? That kind of stuff. So our moods are actually really linked to different aspects of our performance, and most people don't realize this. But anyways, distraction management, manicure the space ahead of time. The next question is, how long should you focus? And it turns out that biology gives us an answer here too. We try to train people to start their work session, their day, if they can, with a 90-minute block for uninterrupted focus. The reason is the brain has a 90-minute awake and alert slot. We have a 90-minute sleep cycle. Everybody knows that, right? You go through REM sleep. It's a sleep cycle. It's 90 minutes long. There's an inverse cycle. It's an awake and alert cycle. So the brain is built to actually focus 90 minutes at a time. And it does it really quite naturally. So what I always tell people is start by starting, like carve out a chunk, wall yourself off from the world, practice distraction management, have your conversations in advance. Most of the distractions are people who love us, right? Friends, families, coworkers, knocking at our door, ringing the phone. And flow, as I mentioned, makes you 500% more productive. You're going to get time back, massive amounts of time for the people who need your attention, but you have to manicure the space for a little bit. You also have to stay focused on the task and not how on the task is going to make you look. So if I'm working on writing and I'm like, what are my fans going to think? Or if I'm working on a project, like what is my boss going to think or my co-worker, right? All that stuff, I won't go into the technical, but it sort of activates the ego, and the ego turns the prefrontal cortex back on, and that part of the brain stays shut down during flow, and you need it to stay turned off in flow. So you don't want to turn it back on. This is also where people get really, really screwed up task switching. So when they switch from task to task, most of us are really good at getting into microflow on task, right? We're good at the things we do. It's when we switch from one task to the next that we get screwed up. And so have most people do things like call their wives or call their kids or check social media. They do all these things, turn their emotions and their ego back on, and they're just knocking themselves out of that focused flow state. And then they have to fight to get back into it. So distraction management is sort of where I start people. I always say that go into a project, you have to have very clear goals. Flow follows focus, and clear goals tell the brain what to focus on, where to put your attention. And clear goals are like, where's a project going to start? Where is it going to end? What does success look like? That's a clear goal. Clear goals actually massively heighten focus. So I like to have clear goals going into a work session. I manicure the work session, concentration, and then how you attack the challenge really matters. So there's what's known as the golden rule of flow, the most important flows triggers. It's classic. It's known as the challenge skills balance. The idea here is flow follows focus. As we know, we pay the maximum attention of the task at hand when the challenge of the task slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch, but not snap. So if I would put it that emotionally, I would say there's a midpoint between boredom. There's no stimulation here. I'm not paying any attention. I don't care. And anxiety, which is way too much. In between is this sweet spot. If you speak physiology, it's known as the Erskine-Dobson curve. If you, a psychologist, you call it the flow channel. And it's interesting it was actually measured. Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, came up with a number with a Google mathematician, and he decided they came up with the idea that we maximize focus when the challenge is about 4 or 5% greater than our skills. That's a very hard number to measure. We took it and beat on that number for like 10 years. We could never prove it, but we could never we were right, but it was too hard to measure over long term. But what we found is that I always say it's the most accurate metaphor in performance science. So I can't tell you it's a fact, but it's really accurate. 4% is interesting because if you're shy, meek, timid, or like a little less skilled in whatever it is that you're currently doing, you're outside your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be. So you're going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you are a hard charging type A type, I do a lot of work with entrepreneurs. They're always this way. Entrepreneurs will take on challenges that SEALs do this too. They'll take on challenges that are like 40, 50, 60% greater than the skills simply because it just wakes people up, right? And it turns out those really big challenges are great for motivation, but you have to chunk it down. So have a big, high, hard goal, but chunk it down so the thing you're doing right here is just outside your comfort zone, just outside your comfort zone. And you actually go farther faster that way. So I'll shut up there. Those are the 3 most basic flow triggers. That's really where I start.
Yeah, and the
people.
question, you're sort of saying it, and I just want to clarify it in here. The question I had was kind of, what level of proficiency do you need in something, or do you, in order to achieve a flow state in it? Because I will take myself as an example. The things on a day that I could potentially be flowy with, right? There's sort of my typical work, something in front of a computer, I'm typing, I'm writing something, typically would be something like that. There's working out, there's exercise. For me specifically, it's a sport. I go to the gym and I'll do CrossFit, and that's fun. I don't know that that's flowy exactly, but I play soccer and I play indoor soccer. And I tell my wife when I come back from those games, I'm like, I had such a blast playing in that game. So much fun. And like, I think that's kind of flowy for me. The other one is music. And so certainly for me, like music production, I can get really wrapped up in like having Logic open and instruments and plugging in and playing stuff. And I mean, I can lose like 10 hours in a row just doing that.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's super fun. Music editing
Oh
software
my God,
is
it's so much
super
fun.
flowy.
So
Super
much fun.
Yeah.
But
Super
then
flowy.
the other one is guitar. I played guitar for over 30 years, 35 years at this point. So that's yes, but piano is a newer endeavor for me that I've been playing for maybe 5-6 years. And it requires a lot of concentration when I practice. And so this is kind of the question that I'm asking here is like, is that like that high level of like, I'm really practicing and focusing on that? Is that a flow thing or is that a skill development thing? And
Yeah, so those are all great questions. Let me back up one step and start with the skill development part, the last thing you said. Let me start there and I'll work way backwards into the other stuff. So flow is really what happens when you can perform a skill without having to
Yes.
think too much
Yes.
about it, right? So you have to learn things consciously with the conscious brain turned on, and then you can perform them unconsciously. Um, that's usually flow. And usually what happens in flow is like you take like 2 or 3. So you've been learning to play piano. And as you know, like learning comes in waves. There's certain skills you learn now, and then like, oh, I can add on to this later, and how this is how that skill fits in, and that sort of thing. The example I always give is like if you're trying to learn how to swing a baseball bat, there's 9 skills. You have to keep
Mm.
your eye on the ball. You have to step into the pitch. You have to shift your hips. You have to swing through. There's 9 separate skills. Most of them are learned one at a time or 2 at a time, like a couple of them together. Like we step into the pitch and swing through. Like usually you're taught that together, but you can only hold like 3 or 4 concepts in your brain at once. So you're gonna like learning is conscious. When you can perform them all together, that's more flow. Now you asked a really interesting question, which is usually expertise definitely helps. The more you know, the better you're going to do, the easier it's going to be. That said, as you know, like piano's a really hard one because learning instruments are hard. But like in the beginning, you fumble around for like 2 weeks, and like 2 weeks in, you can slowly like now you can suddenly start to play chopsticks, and you'll find flow states then, right? Like early on in the learning curve, there's like a fuck ton of flow states in the advanced beginner category. There's not much in beginner, but at advanced beginner is what gets hooked people on sports, right? Like, and then you get to going from intermediate to expert. To me, is the most flowless transition there is. And usually by the time you get to kind of low level expert, like I'm a
Mhm.
skier or a writer. These are the 2 things I'm really great at. 90% of the time when I go skiing, flow state. 90% of the time when I sit down to write, flow state. I work with the same editor a couple times a week. I have for 25 years. We're really good at working together. We know exactly how to like trigger each other, push us into flow, work together. That's always a flow state. Those are guaranteed flow states, little group flow states that I get a couple times. I work out too. Every now and again, like somebody will show at the gym and I'll get into squat competition or something like that'll happen. And then it's a little flowy. But as a general rule, I'm training for skiing. Skiing's the flow state. The gym, does it go away? It goes away. And don't let me go away until we talk about cell phones, gym use, and flow.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah.
Go there next.
Let's have that
Just go
conversation
there right after
before.
this.
Okay. But yeah, because if you ever, a lot of people listening to this are working out, and you guys are probably actually really hurting yourself by looking at your phone while doing it. I'll do it now. So most of us go to the gym for both mental and physical fitness, right? And flow underpins both of that. And on the physical side, I just told you, you're stronger, you're faster, fast twitch muscle response goes up, stamina goes up. So not getting into flow while you work out, even if it's a microflow state, which is usually what happens when we work out, it's not great, but this self goes away and you don't have to think for a little bit. And certainly we're all working out for health purposes and mental health purposes as well. It gets quiet upstairs, it calms us down a little bit, resets the nervous system. When you look at your phone between sets, which is what everybody does now, they check their phones between sets. It's like looking at your phone between tasks. You're activating the prefrontal cortex. You're turning your brain back on. You're literally blocking flow. So physically, you're actually making yourself weaker. You're like eroding your stamina and lowering your strength by doing that. And mentally, you're actually not getting the benefit. Like we're working out to shut the fucking voice in our head off so we can get a break and reset our nervous system, right? And if you're turning it back on, every time you do that, what Andy Huberman calls the 11th set, right? The 11th rep, where you like finish the rep and like pull out your phone, you are literally blocking flow, and you're working at cross purposes both mentally and physically. It's amazing. I was just hanging out with a really cool group of a mastermind for all the guys who own like the biggest gyms in America, and we were talking about this, and we think like gyms are going to start banning phones. Once they figure this out, they'll start banning phones and things like that. But I'm noticing, and it's a real problem. And I work out at a really, like, I love lifting weights. And I work out at this crazy power lifter, weightlifter gym where half the people are pro athletes. And I'm literally watching them work out all the time going, you guys are literally like, this is what you do for a living. And you're actually doing the worst job
You
at
know
it.
what's
It's
funny about
amazing.
that is that makes a ton of sense, but I guess it makes me really thankful that I mainly do CrossFit as a workout discipline because
Oh yeah, you
there's
can't pick up a
no
phone in
way I'm picking
CrossFit.
up a
Yeah,
phone. And
exactly. You
when I go in
cannot.
and
Yeah,
I get the group. I
exactly.
mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's the group dynamic of it, you know, so I do that like 4 times a week. And then I do hot yoga once or twice a week. And both those things, it's like, I'm fully engaged in that, whatever we're doing. But I also grew up in an era lifting weights as a kid, where there were no phones or anything like that. So even when occasionally I'll just go do like a pump sesh, or even with my kids, cause they'll go just kind of lift weights and I'll go with them.
Right.
I leave my phone in the locker room. Like, I'm not even interested in it. It's just not.
I leave mine in my. I want the music, but I put it in airplane mode. The minute I walk into the gym,
Yeah.
it goes into
Yeah.
airplane mode, and I just have access to the music, and I make sure, like, never open up my apps or messages.
Music's
or,
interesting because that's
you know,
something I used to care so much about, and now I don't care at all. It's like, even in a CrossFit class, I'll be like, "What do you guys want to play?" I'm like, I don't even hear it. I'm so like zoned in on the exercise.
Oh, I'm so
Well, I
musically
am
driven.
normally
Like
too.
ski, I gotta ski to hip hop. I gotta lift weights to metal or punk.
Hey, I want to get into this program you have, the PTSD thing, because you mentioned it a little bit, but I know this
Yeah.
is a new thing for you, and I don't know much about it. So talk about this. Is it a program?
Yeah, so it's just, well, no, we're at the front end of it. And I'm really excited about it. So we've known sort of the good side of flow, that it underpins happiness and well-being and overall mental satisfaction, since the 60s. It's only recently, past 3 years, first my team proved that flow overwrites PTSD. My friend Karina's team proved that flow overwrites burnout. And then a team in Europe proved that flow is neuroprotective against depression, all the stuff I told you before, and anxiety and bipolar disorder. So suddenly, and that was amazing. We had been working on really a bunch of like really esoteric, what sound consciousness, purpose. The purpose work sort of led us back into resilience, and on the back end of the resilience work, for reasons that I'm not going to go into, I was looking at our data and I was like, I think we have new protocols for PTSD, addiction, depression, and what the military calls transition failure, which is basically technological unemployment.
Yeah.
I got out of the military and I
Right.
can't get a fucking job, right? That's what, and it turns out flow is incredibly useful in all 4 conditions. Now, you're looking at me like, what do those conditions have in common? And how could flow possibly be useful? And it's fair enough. But if we talk about the neurobiology at a high level, all these conditions have the same problem, which is known as network inflexibility. You get locked into certain brain networks. So PTSD, we know this. The hippocampus, which is memory, and the amygdala, which is fear, keep firing and you can't get out of that loop. In depression, it's the default mode network, which is rumination. It keeps spiraling and can't get out of that loop. In work or reskilling, it's like functional fixes nested. Your identity is trapped with the who you were before, and you can't. It's basically you're locked out. You have a fixed mindset. You're locked out of a growth mindset. You can't learn new things. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And it's again network inflexibility, and same thing with addiction. And it turns out flow, what it really does at a deep level is restores a property known as metastability. Metastability is network flexibility. It allows the brain to jump all over the place and, be really, really flexible. And because of that, it is why flow is so useful against all these conditions. We know this from the military. The military, for a very long time now, has been using surfing as a flow trigger to heal PTSD in veterans, right? A lot of the work has been done with SEALs.
I know a guy who runs a nonprofit that's about
and
surfing for veterans. Yep.
Yeah. So I've said for a long time, so that's, and we know with addiction, like they don't so much use it with veterans, though they're starting to, there's a lot of like outdoor bound kind of things for teenagers, right? Teenagers with drug problems, and send them off and they go camping in the wilderness for a month and they come back, and right. That's also, they're getting the kids into flow, and the flow overwrites the addiction pathways, and the same thing. So we realized we were actually looking at new protocols. Simultaneously, I've been saying for years, if you give me my dream flow lab, I want a wave pool, because you could pioneer stuff in a wave pool with surfers where it's almost a guaranteed flow state. And then I want to take what we learned in the wave pool and put it into like an immersive media lab. So you're using video games and VR to get the same, to try to get like the surfing out of it and just make it, tech enabled. And then once we figured out the tech stuff, put into a low tech creativity studio. So you're just using drumming and movement and whatever. It was always a impossible dream, because wave pools until very recently were like $150 million, but now they're everywhere, and they're not that. And they're, and once this happened and this new work got done, we were like, oh my God, now we can do it. We can literally, so the goal is, we're starting with Navy SEALs. We're moving into first responders. And the goal is within 5 years that every veteran leaving the military will be trained in this protocol, because the 4 largest problems with veterans are depression, PTSD, addiction, and transition failure. And those are the 4 problems. And you can use one protocol to really go at all 4. So that's the work that we're just starting in on now. And I've taken, I actually took the Flow Research Collective, which is my long-term company, and we split it in 2. We have the Flow Research Collective, which is now a nonprofit on the research side, completely focused on this. And then we moved our training business to the Flow Institute and built a sister institution to run training out of. But we're creating the nonprofit to go straight at this process. Obviously, once we get out of veterans, we'll go wide. We'll just go into the general public with this stuff. But we're going to start. I wanted to start with SEALs, because you guys know how to surf. Most of you are not afraid of water. You know how to surf. So like, I can pioneer stuff with SEAls in a wave pool.
Not afraid of water.
Easily.
I'm not sure we all know how to surf. I'm not the best
afraid
surfer
of water
in the world.
Yeah.
But,
but I don't need you to be a good surfer. I need you to learn enough that I can put you into flow, and the state can do its work.
So wait, so is that program fully baked?
Right.
Is it like ready to go? Do you have a
No, we're literally at the front. And when you called, I was like, that's really weird. Did you guys hear about this? Because there's a couple of SEALs on my board and things like that. We are literally transitioning right now. Like, the nonprofit is like, it's being established like as this month at that transition is happening. We haven't even started fundraising around it yet. Because it's that new, but I just was like, okay, I got to tell you what we're doing, because it's fun and I'm really excited about it. And it allows to it also, like, a lot of things that have sort of worked. It gives you, with this idea of metastability, it gives us a way to measure a lot of things that we couldn't measure before. So now we have neural markers for, you're getting better from PTSD. We know what we're looking for. We also are hoping that the same protocol could possibly work with TBI, traumatic brain injury, though there's a network and flexibility problem that's a part of TBI, but there's also like neurology, a bunch of, you know what I mean? Your brain got blown up, and that. So we'll do the TBI work, but I want to do it like in partnership with Walter Reed or somebody where there's like great neurologists who understand the stuff, the actual physical side that that's sort of a little beyond the work that we do. And I would need partners for that.
Yeah. So are you looking to, would it be something where people just sign up individually? Is it like partner with a nonprofit, or, well, you already have, but
Oh, we're becoming the nonprofit. In the beginning, it's about what our goal is, to pilot the protocol and train the trainers.
Got it.
And do it that way. It's a McKinsey model more than I do some training, but I don't, in my experience, soldiers should be working with soldiers, like, often in that situation.
Yeah, I know
what I mean? There's just better ways to do that,
Okay. Cool. That's awesome. There's a couple things from that too that I would just highlight. I think so much of those types of conditions, you're not present, right? Like, if you're dealing with PTSD, anxiety all the time, you're just not present. Your mind is like in the future or in the past or both. And so much of what flow makes you do is be present. It makes you can't be immersive in something and also be thinking about whatever happened to you.
We were talking about the prefrontal cortex, right? Why when it shuts off the part of your
Yep.
brain that I said shuts off. So literally, that's the part of your brain that calculates
Mhm.
time. So why does time pass so strangely in flow? Like, why are we in this eternal, perpetual
Yep.
present sense? It's literally because the part of your brain that creates the past and the future goes away. It's one of the reasons that anxiety drops so much in flow, for the exact reason
Right.
that you mentioned. All your fears, it's like horrible shit in the past you want to avoid in the present, or horrible shit that might happen in the future. Right here, right now, unless you're an action sport athlete in a life-threatening situation, you're a combat athlete in a combat sport, you're playing a contact sport, or you're in the military, chances are right here, right now is not threatening.
Right.
Very few people actually deal with present tense
Of
fear,
course.
right? There's only a handful of professions or things you could
Yeah.
do where that's real. Everybody else, it's
Yeah.
projected.
Yeah. I mean, and it's the reason why I'm such a big fan of learning some kind of skill, because for me, it's when I'm trying to learn something on piano, I just can't, I don't have any bandwidth at that point to be worried about something
There's
or
no sense of self.
yeah. Right. Um,
Yeah, my version of piano for like this, my
oh,
sketch
nice.
pad.
Yeah. Cool.
I like that's when I want to transition between tasks, I'm a big believer in what we train people in what's creativity microdosing. So between tasks, instead of like calling your wife or doing something where you turn your brain back on, what we've discovered is the best way to sort of reset between the brain is low grade movement. Just enough movement that you have to pay attention, and drawing, gardening, walking, like any of those things works sort of perfectly between picking up the guitar between tasks. It doesn't let your brain, the prefrontal cortex part of your brain, turn back on, and it gives you that reset. So like when I have to go from task to task, I've got like a stack of sort of comic books over here out of sight where I just open one up. I'm like, oh, that's a cool face. And I try to draw it. It'll take 3 minutes. And then I go into my next task. And creativity
Interesting.
microdosing. There's also a tremendous amount of benefits from this. Like creativity is this amazing peak performance tool that most people sleep on. They have no idea that flow is probably the most powerful lever in the brain. The second most powerful lever is creativity. And it's a really promiscuous skill. So you can learn how to draw, or you learn how to play piano. What you don't realize is by learning how to play piano, you're actually entirely changing the structure of your brain and how it thinks around
Totally.
problems. There's all these
Yeah.
meta skills. In fact, I'll give you a crazy one. So creativity is underpinned by the personality trait openness to experience. You would imagine novelty and creativity, right? So openness to experience is the only of the big 5 personality traits that's actually correlated with mortality. So we know that about a year to 2 years before you die, openness to experience plummets. So there's a direct correlation. Like there's certain things that they can use to measure when you're going to die. Grip strength is really good. Thigh muscle mass is another one, and creativity and openness to experience. And openness to experience crashes before we die.
Because that's actually a perfect segue, because I wanted to talk about the creativity stuff and the learning stuff, because that was the other piece of this book that I thought was so fascinating, because it's something I'm so interested in. And there's a bunch of stuff you talk in here about that I'm always like, yeah, how does that work exactly? So on the creativity thing, the question that a lot of people have is that the nature versus nurture kind of argument, right? And you have this thing in here, I can't remember the exact study, but you were talking about where basically kids, as they get older and blah, 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 the amount of creativity that goes down. And then it's like adults, it's whatever, however you measure it, but 4% or something. It was one of these stats where I went, whoa, we're basically being uncreative, or whatever the right way to say that is a learned thing, essentially, for everybody. Do I have that right?
Now, you do have that right. It's the thing that I always point out with that study, and I probably should have said it more clearly in the book, is that study was done in, I want to say in the 70s.
Okay.
When it was the 70s, might have been the late 60s. So you gotta like corporate culture and how you were supposed to behave as an adult in the 60s and 70s is really
Yes, of
different from
course.
today. So, right, creativity is a learned skill, as you know, and it requires practicing. And it's funny because one of the reasons I train people in creativity microdosing is, so what happens as we age? Oh, we get more responsibility and we have to put away childish things. So what do we stop doing? We
Yep.
stop playing. There goes the surfboard. There goes the guitar. There goes the skateboard. There goes the art sketches and all that stuff. And we are literally pruning our lives of the things that drop us into flow. That's literally all we're doing. We're pruning the easy access to flow from our lives. And it's absurd for a simple reason that flow's a focusing skill. It's like meditation. You know you can practice meditation because you're getting better at focusing. Flow's the same way. So the more flow you get, the more flow you get. You want more flow at work? Great. Go skiing on Saturday. Get into a flow state. You'll get more flow on Monday because it's a focusing skill and you're training your brain how to focus in the particular way you need to. So, first and foremost, like, you don't put down childish things. Pick them up. We find that with adults, when people want more flow in their life, I gave you the 3 triggers. The other place I tell people to start is we all have what's known as a primary flow activity. The thing we've done since we were a little kid to get us into flow. I'm listening to you. I know it's soccer
Yeah, right,
and music
exactly. Yep,
for you,
it
right?
is.
For you. Like, I know that. Like, I can tell. For me, I gave you mine. It's skiing or editing with my best friend, my editor. Like, those are my 2 big macro flow states. But we all know we all have that. And if you're like, what's my primary flow activity? Close your eyes and think about your favorite memories, throughout your life. If they're not tied to a historical thing, my graduation, my marriage, my all that sort of stuff, chances are you're remembering a flow state. One of the things that happens in flow is learning and memory skyrocket. The happy memories we have tend to be flow states. They stick in our brain for most of our lives. So interrogate your happy memories, right? See what has most, and double down. The research shows that if we can spend 2 to 4 hours a week in using our primary flow activity, it will massively increase the amount of flow in our
The
lives.
soccer thing I use this
Across the
example all the
boards.
time because it's exactly that thing. It's like I grew up playing very competitive soccer and was like, all gung ho on that. But then at some point that ends. It's like, okay, went in the military, did all that kind of stuff. And that wasn't part of the picture anymore. And for years I didn't do any of it, but got back into it in the last few years, just for almost that exact reason. It was like, I need an activity that is just fun. It is just fun. Like I'm playing, right? And I don't care really. I mean, I'm competitive. That's my.
By the way, there's a great, in the theory of game design, I've got to blank the guy's name. He has a great quote where he says, fun is just another word for learning under optimal conditions.
I love it. Love that. And
Right?
it's true, right? Like if you think about that, I'm competitive, but I don't really care about the score. I mean, the first game we played the other night, I think we lost like 12-3 or something like that, but I was still like, I had a blast. But if you think about all of the positive stuff that is going on in that, it's social. There's obviously the exercise benefit, but I'm not even really doing it for that. I've exercised plenty outside of that, but I'm 3D problem solving at high speed, right? For 50 minutes or whatever it may be. And it's exactly that.
Yeah, I call it high-speed geometry. When the brain has to do high-speed geometry, that's what my favorite thing is, to ski through the trees. Because literally, like, if you're not completely present, you're going to hit a tree at 50 miles an hour and die. So, like, it's really, it's instant focus.
By the way, where do you live? If you
perfect.
ski a lot, where are you? Oh, okay.
I live in Tahoe.
So I'm in Whitefish, Montana. It's opening day on the mountain here today. So.
Oh, I got a bunch of friends in Whitefish.
Yeah, so it was
That's
like
really
I drove into work here today, and it's like the town is just empty because everybody's up on because it's snowing. It's snowing today
Everybody's
too,
skiing.
so it's opening day and it's snowing out there. Yeah.
Oh, shut up! Don't rub it in.
I'm not up there right now either, man. And I just got a new set of skis the other day. So, okay. So the other thing on the creativity thing, there's actually a couple things, but talk about that. You sort of talk about it in the book a little bit. This like. That aha thing that we get, right? Like when you're looking at a problem, I'll use the example of, I've got little kind of brain teaser things that I've got in a drawer here that I use like in the middle of the day sometimes as kind of a break to just kind of like have my mind do something else. But there's a bunch of games from a company called Think Fun, and one of them is solitaire chess. And you basically, you set up the pieces, it gives you a little board, like a quarter of a board, you set up the pieces and you've got to kill you got to take them all out in with having a kill move with every single move, right? And they get harder and harder and harder. And I've already gone through the entire thing, but as I was going through it, I would get to one where I'm looking at it and I'm just looking and looking for 15 minutes. I don't know, put it aside. Next day, looking. And then at some point, oh, I know what it is. And I always wonder, like, what is that? What's happening, right? Like, what's going on in my brain that made that happen all of a sudden?
It's funny. So we have done a tremendous amount of work, and my next book is this neuroscience textbook, and then I have a book coming out with Peter Diamandis, but the book after that is on intuition, which is where I've been working for the relationship between intuition and flow, because intuition gets very loud in flow, turns up a lot. And why is that the case was a long-standing question. And those aha insights, as you've noticed, when we have them on the other end of them, they tend to kick you into flow a little bit too, right? When you have an insight, you tend to get a flow state on the back end of it. And how does all that work, and what is that? So the process of what you're actually talking about in psychology, they call opportunistic assimilation.
Okay, it's very
and what that
technical
basically
sounding,
means
okay.
is, so yeah, what it basically means is, and this is really interesting for a flow and a problem solving perspective too. When we're trying to solve a problem, it turns out the more you feed your brain information and the more frustrated you get trying to solve a problem, you put it down. And what happens is your brain passes it over from your conscious mind into your subconscious. And this is why, so both flow states and the creativity cycle, they both have cycles and they map onto each other. At the front end of a flow state, the front end of a creativity cycle, there's a struggle or a preparation phase. You're just learning the skill for the first time, right? Conscious mind is on. And then there's a release phase where you take your mind off the problem. Low-grade physical exercise works best. A lot of people, you'll work all day on a problem, you'll go home and you'll take a shower and the answer will pop into your head. So that's because the shower is the release phase. And while it's not low-grade physical exercise, the reason physical exercise works is when you're like drawing, right? Your eyes are engaged, your hands engaged, multiple senses. And when multiple senses are engaged, it's harder to think about anything else. You've got to stay focused on the present. When we go take a shower, it's all this vestibular awareness is suddenly turned on. You've got water pegging down on you and everything, like there's a lot of sensation. And it's sort of like you stop thinking about what you're doing and you're distracted by the feeling of the water. And that's the release phase, and it kicks you into the next phase in the cycle, which is flow, basically the inspiration, breakthrough. But anyways, the reason you want to do this is your conscious mind is a serial processor. It's very slow and it has limited RAM.
Okay.
Very limited, right? So most working memory caps out at 4 items. Once we think about 4 things, we can't hold any more in our brain. So now, opportunistic assimilation, you're actually going to stack your brain way more than if you were trying to solve that puzzle. You tried to solve it like 17 different ways. You got frustrated. You put it away, right? The brain then chews on it at a subconscious level. Opportunistic assimilation means you walk into a room, usually, so I'll explain how it happens in the aha insight, and then I'll talk about intuition in a second. You walk into a room, and it usually happens in rooms where there's a bunch of novelty, you go outside, something like that, where there could be a bunch of possible solutions to your problem, and your brain will actually send out it's known as a slow wave ripple. It'll send out this ripple through all of your associative cortexes to see if anything in the current scene that's high in novelty can help you solve old unsolved problems. So the brain stores unsolved problems in a specialized search queue, basically. And whenever we go into high novelty environments where there could be possible solutions, the brain will send out this slow wave ripple to say, is there something in this environment that might help solve one of those problems that I've got stored? And so what happened to you is exactly that, right? Like something in the environment could have been something internal to you, right? Like a feeling, a sensation, something, but something triggered the associative memory that got you to that solution in that environment, and that's why it happens. And we can talk about exactly sort of what happens in the brain when you have that aha insight. But
It's
that's
just
really
so
what's
wild
going on.
because like on the surface, it seems like nothing's changed. It's like one moment I'm here and I can't figure this out. And the next moment I'm here and I did figure it out somehow. And it's just such a bizarre thing to experience.
It's a wild, yeah. It's a wild, yeah. That's all. Insight is always that way. Scientific problems are often that way. You know what I mean? Like, I can look at something for 20 years, literally 20 years. Don't get it. 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 Somebody writes an article that's like tangentially related, and I'm like reading the article. It says something, and all of a sudden, the solution is something I've been looking at for 20 years pops into my head, and I'm like, this is amazing. What just happened? That was what happened with the PTSD work. I wasn't looking for protocols for healing protocols at all. I was actually trying to see, I was looking at synchronicity and purpose and flow, which sound like very unrelated things. And it turns out they're the exact same experience neurobiologically at different scales of time. Synchronicity is over seconds, flow is over hours, and purpose is over a lifetime. But the mechanism that's underneath each of them are very similar. And that's what we were looking at. And suddenly I was looking at new out of this work. I remember I was on the phone. I was talking to my chief science officer, and I was like, did you see that? I was like, is that even possible? Did we just like cure these conditions? Because that's weird. And that I love that feeling where you're shocked by yourself. You're surprised by your own excellence.
The other piece of this though is the kind of knowledge acquisition piece of this, the just kind of reading, and you talk a lot about this, and I'm such a big proponent of this as well, which is, I was talking to my wife about this the other night of just, the fact I read a lot of books in support of this podcast of people that have, a lot of times I'm interviewing somebody who's written a book, and I really have found, generally speaking, I think I was a pretty good reader, but now my reading level in terms of the volume of books that I read is a lot higher. And I have found through that, you just start to see patterns across things where it's like, hey, like, oh, what this guy's talking about. Oh yeah, that other guy wrote this, or this other woman who wrote this book, she was talking about that kind of thing. And there's a lot to that. And it's one of these things where I worry sometimes about our species and the fact that we don't read books anymore. And like, you know what I mean? So,
let me speak on this, because this is the actual this is how you train for this. So I said earlier, sometimes when you have that insight, it triggers a flow state. The reason is one of flow's triggers is creativity. And what that really means is pattern recognition. When we link ideas together in the brain, you get a little squirt of dopamine. Dopamine is a focusing chemical. It does a bunch of other things, but it focuses your attention. So when you have an aha insight, it's that pattern recognition. Two ideas, unrelated things, snap together. Hit a hit of dopamine that drives you into flow, drives focus, drives flow. And by the way, everybody has this experience, right? Most people have done logic puzzles or Sudoku or crossword. Get an answer right, that little rush of pleasure you get, that's dopamine. That's what we're talking about here. But to have pattern recognition, to have aha insights, you have to stock your pattern recognition system with information. Right? It's new ideas connecting to old ideas. That's how this works. And what research has shown is that it depends. I think you need about 25 pages a day of reading, usually far away from yourself. So the problem, what happens to a lot of people is as we get older, we specialize. And so we tend to read very close to our discipline. And when you're very close to your discipline, you can get connections between ideas, but you're not going a very far way. It's a really closely related idea being collected to a really closely idea, and it's not a, oh my God, it's a, oh yeah, that's out there. I get that kind of thing. The brain's a pattern recognition engine. It will no, it's going to do this automatically. You could be, you could be a Navy SEAL and you could suddenly be reading about like 14th century Mongolian cooking practices. Your brain is going to find a way to connect 14th century Mongolian cooking practices with like the mission that you're currently like. It will do it anyways because this is what brains do at a really basic level. You don't have to do that work. You just have to feed it. If you're not feeding it 14th century Mongolian cooking recipes or whatever the fuck it is, there's no ammunition. Literally, like so 25 pages a day is usually enough to feed the pattern recognition system for most people. So if you're a good reader, I always say that two things are important here. Flow, you need to feed the pattern recognition system, and you also have to regulate your nervous system. That challenge skill sweet spot between boredom and anxiety is really thin. So if you're anxious, this was the conversation we were having off the air before we started. If you're anxious, there's too much norepinephrine in your system. It's going to push you out of that challenge skill sweet spot we talked about earlier. So you always are having to emotionally regulate. I end my day, I go immediately from whatever it is that I've done my last task into a sauna. And I use an infrared sauna because it will automatically lower cortisol, does it anyways. Really great for recovery from a serious athlete like you. So it's really great for recovery. And I will meditate for the first 15, 20 minutes because that manicures my nervous system. And then I'll read for the next 20 minutes. And I'll sit this on for 40 minutes. And I can read a page a minute on average. So I will stock up my pattern recognition system and reset my nervous system. And the other thing about reading, most people don't realize this, is reading is actually more effective for nervous system regulation than, say, breath work. So they found that 6 minutes of reading fiction will calm you down more than 10 minutes of meditation. Right? So reading, and it's fiction specifically because you want to get wrapped and lost in the story. I guess if you're like, I'm a geek, so I can read a neuroscience textbook and get lost in the story. So I think what they're saying is you need to read something that you get lost in the story so your brain turns off. Right. That's what they're trying to do. So I think it's sort of what kind of person you are, what you should read. But this is my end of the day ritual, is like the sauna, the meditation, and the reading. And I have like in 30, 40 minutes, I have totally done 90% of what I need to do to prompt flow in my, like, it's an amazing sort of recovery ritual that I try to end most of my days
I've always
with.
heard nonfiction in the morning, fiction in the evening, basically, for that exact kind of reason where, right?
Yeah, I think that's probably
accurate.
What about that's pretty good.
Physical book versus audiobook? Like when you're in the sauna, are you physically reading a book that you're dripping all over?
I'm reading a physical book. Yeah. So I am not a fan of audiobooks, and I'm not, so a couple of reasons. What you really want to trigger pattern recognition is you got to think about how this works when you're reading. You're reading, you stumble upon the fact where you're like, oh, that's really cool. And then you pause and your brain thinks for a couple of seconds and then it connects the idea. So we don't pause audiobooks. People they don't write. You never pause. You never like, oh, let me rewind that. You don't do it. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that the brain uses geometry to store information. So the principal storage system in the brain is the hippocampus. That's your memory center. And the hippocampus is actually map-making machinery. That's what it evolved from. It evolved to remember where's the ripe fruit tree. Where's the cave with the saber-toothed tiger so I can avoid it next time? Where's the good fishing stream? That's what the brain evolved to remember, essentially. And so we use geography naturally as part of memory. So when you are reading a book, your brain will use where you are in the book as geometry, literally. So this is why if you have favorite quotes in books, you don't just remember the quote, you actually probably know where it is in the
Oh
book if
yeah.
you've read the physical book. It's because your brain uses that as part of it. There's no geometry with an audiobook. So we don't have the aha insights as frequently, we don't have the pattern recognition as frequently, and you remember far less. And this is a known fact, right? If you test memory versus Kindle versus reading on paper
Yeah.
always outperforms the Kindle. So you're actually hurting your memory, which is now, if I have a long cartridge, if I gotta like, if
Yes.
I'm in a position where I'm like, there's
Yeah.
no, you know what
I
I mean?
double
Like,
it
of
up.
course. Yeah. I mean, of course, if that's what, like, that's what I'm going to use. But if you have a choice, so yeah, and I know, and I take notes when I write. So like when I read in the sauna, I've got like,
I was gonna
I've got
say,
the
I don't even know
rag,
how
like
you
to
would
wipe
do
my face
that.
off,
I
to wipe
could,
my hands off.
I'd ruin the book.
I make it yeah, I got this way of
Okay.
holding it up. I'm
That's
like,
great.
it's not for everybody. I get that, but like it works really well for me. The other thing is, usually I do the same thing. I'll read a lot more nonfiction in the morning. I'll read
Yeah.
fiction at night. And even though I write fiction and nonfiction, and usually even writing fiction is a work thing for me, I don't like when a note in a fiction book is, oh wow, that's a fucking great line. I want to remember that line for later. And all I gotta do is like write down the page number, write great line in the back. I don't have to like write down I don't have to take notes. So I find I can do it
Yeah.
that way sometimes.
Those are all really good points. I had that conversation with somebody else too about that difference between physical reading and audiobooks, which which I had never thought of, which is exactly what you're saying, where I'm reading an actual book, I can stop and think, oh, let me think about that for a second and pause in the middle of it, where the audiobook just keeps going. And it's like, well, you don't have any time to,
Yeah, it's the pause that if you are willing, like I was training a bunch of people recently, and there was a woman in my class, and she was like, but I pause my audiobook and then I take notes. And I was like, well, okay. I mean, you're still not going to get the geometry of it, but you're taking notes, and that's great. And you're having like, cool, that makes sense. And if there's some people want to claim they're like auditory learners. Remember years ago, there was,
right.
I'm a visual
Yeah.
learner, I'm an auditory learner. That all that is totally wildly disproved. It is
Oh,
not
okay.
actually true at all. None of that's really a thing. We have preferences though, but they vary. Like there are certain things that you can learn very well auditorily, and there's also stages. Like I have found that my first exposure to a topic, I want to learn it through a book. But after I've read the book, then I want to go out and listen to a bunch of lectures, and then I want to go read some more, right? So like I have found that like sometimes it wants to come in through the eyes, sometimes it wants to come through the ears, depending on where I am in the learning process, depending on what I'm
Yep.
trying to learn. Certain things I can't learn auditorily at all. I have to learn through
It's like
reading.
I love your sort of 5 books or 5, whatever that is, 5 books on a topic, right?
5
Because
books of
you
stupid.
basically are highlighting this sort of 4 out of 5 dentists thing, where it's like, get the 5th dentist opinion too, because who knows?
Yeah. So, to me, it was how many books, because I was a journalist, right? When I started out. So I would have to become an expert in topics. And it was a big responsibility. Like when you're doing like it doesn't sound like much, but the story I always tell is, I don't tend to do very political stuff. That's not something I tend to do, but I was writing a very political story back in the 90s on a weird, very important, but very strange topic. And I remember I was talking to my editor. I was on staff at GQ at the time, and GQ had a readership of 1 million. And I asked, my editor was like, asked me about a fact. And I was like, oh yeah, I still need to drill down on that. I don't know yet. And he got really pissed at me. And I was like, it's like, I'll get it. He's like, dude, you write about weird topics that most people will never learn about other than your article. You have an opinion, and 1 million people are going to agree with you. Get it fucking right. And I was like, okay. He's like, I'll get it right. Like it really like, I realized, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of responsibility here. There's a lot of people on the other end of this, and people making decisions. And, with this, especially that particular topic, like I'm not even going to go into it because it too many people are going to have flash reactions to what I was writing on. It's not worth going into. But it just stayed with me, and I was like, whoa, okay, if I have an opinion, a lot of other people are going to be exposed to that opinion, and I had like get it right, kind of thing. So I took it very, very seriously. And I found, as you pointed out, when you interview subjects, you can literally interview 3 or 4 people in the row. They'll all give you the exact same answers, but you get to like the 5th or 6th person, and somebody's
Yeah.
going to turn you around completely, like reverse. And I started to realize, I was like, oh wow, you don't really know anything until you've been turned around completely and had to fight
Yeah.
your way back to the truth.
Yeah.
Then you know a thing. And so my question was always, when do I know enough stuff to interview experts? And when do I know enough stuff to have an opinion in public? And I discovered that I had to read about 5 books before I could get in a room with an expert and have a really learning conversation. I'm not an expert yet. I just am a guy who can ask good questions of experts. That's all I've done at that point. And then I finally, once you get completely turned around on a subject and have to fight your way back to the truth, then you'd probably know enough to
Yeah.
have an opinion in public about it.
I know you got to go and wrap this up, so I really appreciate you spending so much extra time with me today. This was awesome, super interesting. I could
You're welcome, sir.
keep going on this. I got like 50 other questions here that I could ask you, but we'll save that for another time. But if outside of all of your books, if people want to learn from you, connect with you, where else can they do that?
Yeah. So if you want to train with us, it's flowinstitute.com. If you want to learn about the research and the science side, it's flowresearchcollective.com. And if you want to learn about all the 17 books, or actually 15 books, 2 more are coming out, so it will be 17. That's
Awesome.
stevenkotler.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. Really great meeting you and talking to you. Yeah.
Chris, it was
appreciate
my
it.
pleasure. Good talking to you as well. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to On the X, the official podcast of the Navy SEAL Foundation and an Ironclad original series. Learn more at NavySealFoundation.org or text On the X to 60104. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you next time.